B1 family, welcome to Blacklogic. So today we have a special guest. Getting some feedback here. Today we have a special guest. We have Pamela DENISE Long with us. Denise is not just a commentator or a YouTube tweeter. She's a freelance writer, op-ed contributor, and a fervent advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policies and practices. She's holding a master's degree in educational psychology and a doctorate was soon to be here in organizational leadership and organizational development. She brings a unique blend of academic rigor and real world experience to our discussion. Additionally, as a healthcare practitioner, and she is recognized woman for minority businesses and enterprises. So she is a powerhouse in the field. Welcome, Pamela DENISE Long. How you doing?
Thank you, sir. It's good to be with you again. That was a very generous introduction. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect.
Well, before we get into the video, you had said something off camera about politics. Have you ever considered going into politics?
I have considered it. Yes, that's so funny. I have considered it. Yes. I have been asked to run multiple times. I have evaluated if I want to do that. And I don't know. I think under ideal circumstances, whatever that means, right? It's absolutely necessary at the time, or the party is ready, or the right position becomes available, I would definitely consider it.
Interesting. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but we're going to continue on here. I'm going to see if I can fix it on the way. All right, so I'm just going to mute you when we pause just to make sure there's no other issues while we go forward. But I'm going to hide you on screen here. I'm going to hide myself. We're going to go into this video to kind of start the conversation. And we start off talking about white privilege and defining what white privilege actually is. As well, we want to touch on some things about the white supremacy culture.
We learned your French. We learned your English. We learned your Spanish. We learned your Dutch, your Portuguese, your German. You learned our nothing. You called us stupid. That's white privilege. And I'm sure it probably hurts for you to hear those two words, kind of like gunshots and explosions from those commissioned to protect you, with whisking past your ears. What is white privilege? It is the only 5 decades of legal acknowledgement expected to correct 400 years of white transgression. It's crack versus cocaine. Blacks receiving almost 20% longer sentences for the same exact offenses. Like, for instance, a black man without a record is less likely to get a job than a white felon. Or maybe it's because we're lazy and we don't work hard enough. Like, what the fuck? 400 years in the same field literally is an incredible resume builder. It is Katrina answering the government's prayers of eugenics, Dick Cheney going fishing the next day, Condoleezza on a shopping spree, Bush in San Diego. But Kanye is the one you call crazy because, like, it only took the USA 2 days to get aid to Asia, but 5 for FEMA to get to Canal Street and Esplanade. Is the one black kid who beat the shit out of the odds, but only thanks to Sandra Bullock, Michelle Pfeiffer, and the White Shadow. So now we all can make it. It is the only time thousands of white people are cheering for the black kid to win is in the stadium. It is you looking at me crazy if I told you to go back to Europe, even though we didn't have a say. It is you all of a sudden having a problem with immigration, like this isn't even your nation. How the hell do you discover some shit that wasn't even missing to begin with? You Columbus, our traditions. Had white girls twerking in high definition with multicolored hair and purple nails, but it was ghetto when we did it. Oh, I make you uncomfortable. Try a cramped slave ship, but wait. Slavery is over now. It's just called the prison system because, like, you're not racist because you don't use the N-word, but y'all use niggas every day. What is white privilege? It is the acceptance of bombs over Baghdad, but not over Boston. It is European history being taught as a major and African as an elective. It is learning about my people only 28 days, like I'm not black every fucking second as every white boy. When the fuck my brains out, not because I'm pretty, but because I'm pretty for a black girl. It is people thinking that Africa is one nation. It is the waving of the Confederate flag like you didn't lose the battle and then telling us to get over slavery. It is people saying that black people destroyed neighborhoods, but forgetting that white people have destroyed continents. It is every time I bring up my plight, some white man has to tell me that I'm crazy, but is kind enough to praise my English or say that we are all given the same opportunities, even though he has a family history of wealth, and I don't even know my family history at all. Is the justification of police brutality. Like, what did that person do? I'm sure it doesn't hurt as much when the victim doesn't look like you. It is people thinking that affirmative action is an unfair advantage instead of keeping the qualified from being unfairly disadvantaged or throwing out a qualified applicant because their name sounds too African American. Is Newports imported into black communities, but black boys exported for weed as big plastic asses that are called fat when we naturally have them. It is an Australian woman whose new classic of rap music is everyone who hears this poem dismisses all this truth I just spit as reverse racism. That is white privilege. Thank you.
Well. That was very, very powerful. What are your thoughts on it?
Wow, I had to catch my breath a bit while she was speaking. Yes, that exemplifies many of the elements of white bigotry in America. It's both the privilege that white people have, multiple generations of white supremacy. I can hear you fine.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Her poem exemplifies white fragility, which is the idea that when those truths are spoken, white people get defensive, they get upset, and then the person who's telling the truth has to calm the upset white person. Wow. You know, I listened to that, and there's so many parts of that can be broken apart. And I think, how do Black Americans stay rooted in the truth and at the same time not become mired in it?
Interesting.
Bogged down by it, overwhelmed by it.
How would you define it for yourself?
How would I define white privilege? Or, I mean, I think it's just that. It is the ability to exist in the United States of America with all its racist, anti-Black, and explicitly white supremacist context and history, and not even have to think about the needs, truths, existence, policies needed by Black America, even for 5 minutes, and it would not affect your day, your life, nor your sense of competence in any way, in any field, and any position of authority. That's white privilege to me.
I guess I would define it as this being unequal. Everything is unequal. Unequal access, unequal opportunity, unequal resources, unequal loaning, unequal across the board. That's how I kind of would define it. But since I have you here, I do have a couple of questions. And as you just stated, how you define white privilege. Give us what you would believe a concrete example of what systematic white privilege would be.
So systematic white privilege, going forth with the idea that white privilege in and of itself is something that is inherited and is an outcome of the previous 400 or 600 years, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Of European colonization and prioritizing the needs of Europeans over the lived existence, peace, and access and opportunities for Black people. An example of that, I think, is a political party that talks about patriotism and America, and at no point do they specifically call forth in an admirable, we're going to serve you and represent your interests kind of way, the needs of Black Americans. It is a white person being hired to speak for Black Americans when there are plenty of competent, eager, ready Black Americans who are willing to take those roles and be paid for them instead of some white person speaking on their behalf. It's political parties, since I like to talk about politics, that take the Black vote for granted and don't think that there is any nuance between what Black Americans need as a result of our nested history compared to other people, yet they go forth and provide specific redress, opportunities, funding, rhetoric to support the people that they choose to. It is anti-Blackness rooted in your very being and the way you think without you ever realizing that that is true for you. I mean, it's kind of the water we swim in so many ways, white privilege and that white fragility, because most of us don't speak about the privileges that white people have at the expense of Black American underprivilege because of the sometimes violent physically, but also economically, socially violent response that white people have to speaking that truth.
How would you define white in this country then?
Now it's interesting because I posted about this on Twitter probably a couple of years ago. I can't keep track, but where I ask if there's a definition, if there's a difference between white and whiteness, and do we think that people mean different things when, or nuanced things when they speak those things. So as an identity, based on what the people who codified the term said it was, right? It is the idea that people of European descent and or notable, particularly phenotypically, right? What you physically look like, phenotypically European, it's a category that they're placed into that confers to them the privileges of being white, being European. It's political. It is obviously in all the areas of human activity. It's also ancestral, right? Where you come from Europe, or your people primarily do. But there's a political element to that that confers this ability to advocate for, have your needs met, and even have your needs anticipated as part of what's considered the normal operations of the country, the institution, the neighborhood, the city, all of that. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. I mean, we're basically going to judge people off the way they look, their physical phenotype of, the way we actually view them. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, white privilege is often described as the systematic benefits that come with being white. So how does these systematic benefits manifest in everyday life, and what impact do they have to Black neighborhoods and Black communities?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking that it's the privileges conferred from being white or being perceived as white. Right, which is how some of our people were able to pass and even make their way out of enslavement, because they were, racially mixed and had enough white in the mix of them being formed. They looked white enough, right, to be able to pass as white. So when you talk about how, being white is both a physical thing, and particularly a physical thing, that the closer to looking like a European you are, the more advantages, access you get. Tell me your question again. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I was basically getting at how does this, how does systematic benefits, how they come about in everyday life, and what is the impact they have on Black communities when it comes to the system of white supremacy, but most, concentrated with white privilege.
So what are the costs to Black people? I want to make sure I'm catching you.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Don't sum my questions up like that. Just
I just want to make sure I'm answering the question.
Don't sum it up like that.
No. I want to make sure I'm answering what you're asking me, because I can go off on a tangent. I mean, the cost, and I'm smiling because because the costs are so steep, because it's everything. White privilege is being considered smart and qualified just because you can string sentences together.
Okay.
White privilege is I'm going to use an example from someone that I know who shared this with me just this week. White privilege is you, Black person, being the most experienced person within the organization and the person who was literally hired yesterday and has never done this job in this industry. When the white person comes into your place of business, they go to them. Or when you communicate how something works, what the proper procedure is, they look to the white person to confirm what you, the more experienced person, has just said, right? There is absolutely no basis upon which to confer a greater sense of competence to the white person besides the fact that they're white and you're white and you think they know more, right?
How does that fare with rich Black people and poor white people? Let's say people who live in trailers or people who live up in the hills versus millionaires that are Black folk. How does that compare? If there's white privilege, then how are these Black people more privileged or seem to be more privileged than these whites?
Yeah, so this is a good thing. I like this. So the other element about privilege is not just that you have access and resources, but that you have unearned access, resources, and opportunities that are conferred to you. You are more likely to receive those positive inputs into your development because you are white. Right. So a richer white person or a richer Black person obviously has more, you would think, would have more access or resources for sure than a poor white person. But you slap on a suit, right, on a white person who is poor and put them in competition with a Black person who is more resourced. And to the sister's point in the poem, who is more likely to get hired? She made the point, for example, that a white felon is more likely to get hired than a Black man without a felony, right? Is what that research study has showed. A Black woman with an ethnic name, Shaniqua, for example, is less likely to be hired than a white woman who has less credentials, or a white person with the exact same resume and the name is and the resume is thrown out, the exact same credentials, just because the name is something that is African American sounding. So
It makes me think of a quick question for you. Is that, I can see, is it a form of white privilege, but is it also discrimination? Because they're thinking about the impact of having this Shaniqua at the job and how that may essentially hurt their bottom line. So if I'm looking at this person, I'm like, oh, this person is Black. So, but I have this white person who can do the job too, but of course, not as skilled, not as experienced, etc. But Shaniqua, could it also be a form of discrimination?
Oh, it absolutely is discrimination. And that's the interesting thing. I think these white privilege, white fragility, discrimination, anti-Black racism, white supremacy, those things are entangled in ways that it's hard to say, pull out one and say, this incident is neatly only this thing, right? I think they're entangled. And certainly the name discrimination element is so true. And my point there is, though, even with the same credentials, right, the white person is more likely to be hired. And even with less credentials than the Black person, even if the Black woman's name is Sarah, right, the white person is more likely to be like, it's, yeah, so.
I guess the way I look at it, and I think it's one component that we don't pay tribute to, you have hair discrimination, name discrimination. Listen, you're Black. That's the problem. Okay, that's just the bottom line of it all. Now, you mentioned the Freedom Association. That freedom being associated with white privilege in some regards. So acknowledging and addressing, this white privilege, I guess, how does this constitute or contribute to reducing the constant fear, as we kind of led into previously, of, prejudice, discrimination, bias within, all operations of life? How does, I guess, white privilege play in society and not part of the business world, not part of corporate America or private entities, but in this everyday life? How does white supremacy has ingrained and enriched itself in society? How does that play a role? What's your thoughts on that?
Man, I think about, and I'm bringing forth and honoring Neely Fuller's concept here about the areas of people activity. I
Right.
mean, it's everyday life. Can we take education for an example of how Black students, a Black girl who's talkative, and a self advocate is more likely to be seen as aggressive compared to a white girl who's talkative is more likely to be seen as friendly and a leader and pro social. And if she's a self advocate, she's seen as assertive, right?
Right.
Let's talk about let's talk about sex, right? Because that's one of those areas that he talks about, how white women are, or those who are closer to white, more fair skin, are often seen as more appealing. Like, I think I saw something on my timeline, which a star is supposed to be leading, according to what I saw, and I won't name him, but that's light versus dark. Like this idea that I think some comedian said that, he likes dark skinned women because they can take a punch. And just, I think the whole skin
Wow.
thing about dark and light, I think, and preferences thereof and the treatment of women, and even, I would ask, when you think about that for men, I think there are ways that Black men, particularly dark skinned Black men, are hypersexualized and seen as tools. I don't know if I say y'all because you look like a very brown skinned person and you're obviously a Black man, but I don't know if Black men are offended by that concept or if it's just like, whatever. But
There's
I think
a certain dichotomy behind it.
yeah, I'm sure, right? It's a double-edged sword. But
Right.
yeah, so I think about how people are treated out in public in customer service interactions. I had a close, someone who's very close to me, super, vicarious person, medical professional. Everybody loves this person. Everybody loves this person. And they texted me one day and said, you know what? I just realized when I wear my hair naturally curly, because she's a curly girl, people treat me less kindly than when I wear it straight.
Yeah, because she's going by the European standard straight here versus,
She's observing the difference in how people treat her. And she's very much not a race, like she's not racially illiterate, but she's not somebody who goes around thinking about race all the time at all, just because of her social network and her, economic bracket and all that kind of stuff. But that's something that she observed, and she socializes with a lot of people. So in terms of white supremacy, white privilege, discrimination, and the entanglement of it all, I think those are just a couple examples of people activities, how it shows up.
I also look at it. I also look at it at a much lower level than when you compare. This kind of make it more relevant. I look at white privilege as the ability to walk down the street without being followed or harassed by the police. As simple as that. I also look at it as the ability to go shopping without being stereotyped as a thief, or the ability to get a loan or rent an apartment without being discriminated against, thinking I don't have a certain level of income, or it's just so many things to think about. The ability to see yourself reflected in the media and certain positions of power, because I think it was either this week or last week I did a video of how Black Americans are the face of anything negative in America. They have made us the face of the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, you name it. I'm looking at immigration, and for quite some time they kept showing the Haitians, so they sent all the Haitians back. Now they're showing the Venezuelans, and they even showed a group of Chinese men that were over here coming through immigrations. But you name it, and they made us the face of anti-Semitism. I don't know how they did that, because I posted the crime stats according to the FBI crime data, that Black Americans are 3 times more discriminated and hated upon violently, verbally, etc. And it's reported by the FBI. But we keep going off these other narratives and perspective because there's an agenda, and we all know how mass media produce and promote and advertise and market these things to the people. But none of us, the same apparatuses we have, cell phones, computers, no one's using it in order to research and define what's really going on in the world, even though they're reporting it.
Mm.
So I guess that's the way I look at it in some regards.
You know, that's interesting. Yes to all you said about, the examples you gave about white privilege. I mean, again, all areas of people activity. And to your point about making us the face of things, yes. And there are some ways that we've asked to be represented in some things, right? There are people asking to acknowledge the way that the fentanyl drug crisis was affecting Black Americans, and they've overcompensated, right? They've not just
Right.
acknowledged it, but now it's like mostly y'all. Yeah, except for the fact that when it comes to the non punitive interventions, like getting referred to drug treatment versus going through some kind of judicial process, none of that was happening when we were the face of crack cocaine, even though in the statistics that I last looked at, and I haven't looked at it in probably 6 months or so, but I think almost 60% of last month's, because they collect this data somehow, last month's crack users were white. And so it's, I think that per capita deal has captivated many people. And I think white Americans use per capita as a way of throwing Black Americans under the bus for the poverty-related crimes, subsistence-related crimes, and drug and self-medication and coping that people do when they are hurting.
I guess they couldn't make us the face of the opioid crisis, so they had to make us the face of the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, they definitely couldn't make us the face of the opioid crisis,
Right.
which is fascinating because people weren't prescribing those medications to us. In part, they're thinking,
Right.
in the last data that I read about it, or study that I read about it, they were thinking that the biases that they have about Black people's tolerance for pain prevented them from
Absolutely
providing us
absurd.
pain medicines, which is wild when you think about it, right? Like, the only reason y'all didn't overprescribe Black people these opiates is because you think they can tolerate more pain, and that prevented them from being overprescribed opiates. It's crazy.
Can I throw a wrench? Can I throw a wrench very quickly?
Sure.
Could it be some sort of contorted, twisted, sick, deep in that they know that we're going to be experiencing pain, so they thus prescribe us a less of pain volume? I'm just asking questions for a friend.
He's just asking for a friend. I think that, so what folks have shown and admitted to, unbeknownst to them, yes, there are some healthcare professionals who have acknowledged that they do things to Black people in healthcare settings because they know it's going to hurt them. Like the EMT who admitted that he uses a larger gauge needle on Black children because it hurts them. Yeah, there are, yes, that's disgusting to think about, but we know that bias is disgusting.
Let's look at it a different way. Why is it, or why do you think it's important for white individuals, especially those in positions and places and of privilege, to engage in conversations about white privilege? How does this contribute to creating a more just and equitable world overall if they engage in these conversations?
Yeah, so the first step to recovery, right, is accepting that you have a problem. And so I think,
wouldn't they argue they don't have a problem? They're doing absolutely great and fine.
I think that there are a large number of people who will argue that there is no problem. I think, though, in my experience, both professionally in leading these types of trainings, in having friends who are white and who are on that journey, right, of becoming anti-racist is what we would call it, and my friends are well on their way in that. They are not practiced with having those conversations, acknowledging it out loud, and certainly not with disrupting racism in the moment, because part of the culture is that they don't talk about it. Part of it is that you don't challenge authority. Part of it is that you acquiesce to men, and you acquiesce to authority. You don't embarrass your family by challenging power, which is one of the rules of power. I think that they're engaging in the process of self-discovery and racial identity development is critical for their development as human beings. And as white people understand and accept the realities of the history and the contemporary examples of racism, they can only become more well-rounded people and thus more responsive, considerate, empathetic citizens, and thus better countrymen for us and for the nation. I do not think, though, that becoming an anti-racist society, restoring, repairing, reconstructing society requires 80% of white people to be like, yes, let's ever going to be there. And I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for white people to catch up and say, oh, I get it now, let's do it. So yes, they need to work on that. But in the meantime, we got some stuff that we need to fix and we just need to get busy about doing it. And really it becomes a matter of how tolerant are we going to be? What privilege are we going to afford the resistors and the people who aren't ready in terms of how they slow the pace, how they disrupt the momentum, how they twist the narrative, how they control the reins of power? What privilege will we give honor from resistors? That's the bigger question.
Now, is white privilege a brainchild or a subset of the white supremacist culture or white supremacist system?
So I'm thinking about what came first, right? And I'm thinking that white supremacy was the conscious choice to go and colonize the rest of the world for their concept of God. I'm thinking about the papal bulls and all that kind of stuff. And in so doing, inherent in that is the idea that what white people do is right. And the interests, demands, safety, security, humanity of the other people was far less important, right? And so at some ways, I think, and at some points in time, it was a conscious choice of white supremacy to place the interests, needs, and wants of white people over everybody else. And now at this point, I think there are some people who are consciously white supremacists in that same vein, where they know the right thing to do. They just don't care. They feel like white supremacy is the right thing to do. But I think at this point, some hundreds of years and multiple generations later, I think there's some white privilege that's just an outcome of having lived that white supremacist history and way of operating for so very long, that it's not conscious. It's systemic. It's a part of the water we swim in. It's kind of how we live as a culture now. Yeah.
Now, how would you push back against a Black person who states they've never experienced any form of white privilege? And how would you combat that if they've never had a situation where they blatantly saw, one of the tenets of the white supremacist, system by the way of white privilege, where simply because of somebody's skin color, inherently have them to be put above another person because they're Black?
That is such a good question. So I can tell you that prior to freshman year in college, I cannot recall an instance of anti-Black, like interpersonal between two people, anti-Black racism, right? I didn't realize I was living in a segregated environment. I never played with, when I was in the South, I never played with white kids. For the few years that I was living up north, I did play with white kids because our neighborhood was mixed, so we played all the time. But I didn't realize in the South that it was that it was segregated. That's why I never saw the white kids. I literally didn't think white kids lived in our town, but they did. They just lived on a different side, right? And they went to a private school. So I think that sometimes people aren't aware of what they're seeing when they see it. So obviously, if I'm living in a discriminated environment in the cotton fields in Mississippi, systemic racism and segregation, I'm living in it, but I'm not conscious of it. It's kind of like a fish not knowing they're in water. They just kind of are there. I think sometimes people don't know what they're seeing. And I think sometimes people haven't experienced the thing that we're inquiring about. Like I could legitimately say before 18, I didn't. But then when I got into a mixed environment, I started experiencing a lot. And so congratulations if you've never experienced that. But your lived experience doesn't replace, supplant, negate the validity of, erase the validity of the other 40 million Black people in America. It's like that would, and that's the unfortunate thing when people say, "Oh, I've never experienced it, therefore you're lying," is ridiculous. It just means you haven't experienced it or you don't know what you're seeing. And I'm not going to sit and argue with you. The only thing I will tell such a person is, "Congrats! I'm so glad for you. Your experience doesn't negate mine."
Very good answer. I mean, there's nothing to combat that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what actionable steps can white individuals take to challenge and dismantle white privilege in their personal and professional lives? What do you believe that they can do where we actually receive the tangible results and actually see it happening, that we know that white privilege has in some form or fashion has been overturned or eradicated from society?
Man. So my answer to this type of question has evolved over time. And I think where I am at this point, having done a dissertation on this and having talked to people who are doing it and
Dr.
just
Long, I see you.
I'm
You did a
getting
plug
there.
in there.
I try. I'm getting there. Man, it's really about policy, practices, procedures, and rhetoric, right? I don't care how you feel. I care, but I really don't. It's less important to me, right? Than about how you feel. So I think the question is, when you're at the seat of power and you're at the place where decisions are being made, policies being written, public messaging is being formed, the procedures in your place of business, worship, play is being discussed. The question is, look around the room. Are there Black Americans in this room? And if the answer is no, it's not, I'm going to try to speak for them. It's, I'm going to say that they need to be here and let's go out and get them, right? And bring them to this table. So those two things. I think all along, you have to be learning and developing your racial identity. You're never going to be done with it. So get yourself in some kind of witnessing whiteness course, some kind of book study about, white fragility. But ultimately, it's about, to your point about how we experience it, policy, practice, procedure, and rhetoric. And stop putting on, this irritates me so much, stop putting on, "I'm better than other white people" as some kind of personal garment that you can brag about. Because ultimately, if I'm still experiencing racism, I don't really care that you've been to your course when you ain't changed nothing about how the Black people around you experience life and politics and whatnot.
Very good point. I guess, one of the first things that you stated a couple of minutes prior, recognizing their own privilege and how it benefits them is a key component in that, as well as, believe it or not, a lot of white people, they don't educate themselves about the history of racism in America, right? They just know the word and what defines slavery. They've heard Jim Crow, but they don't even know what Jim Crow is and how long it lasted. And when you speak to people, you're like, "Oh, there should be no racism in the world and no discrimination." And I said, "So everything should be equal, right?" I said, "Well, do you speak out against, racism, discrimination, white privilege, etc.?" Oh, you do speak out. Do you buy from Black-owned businesses? Do you, know what I'm saying? So my thing goes a little bit deeper, because if we're going to have willing participants, then we have to start going off their actions, versus what they tell us, because we've been doing that quite a deal. I mean, think about Black people in general. For the longest, since the 60s, we've been voting Democrat, and they've used different tactics and strategies to keep having us to vote the very same way each and every time. And it has not been beneficial. But somehow they're telling Black people it's been beneficial and it's been working. I mean, I think a lot of these people are masterminds or magicians or psychologists. They're hypnotists. I don't know what's going on where we don't see the results. but we keep doing the same thing. And I know, yeah, it means insanity, but man, if it's not one thing, it's another. Oh, if he becomes president, he's going to become a dictator and he's going to destroy America. Well, we lived through Trump. We lived through Clinton. We lived through Obama. I mean, now we're living through Joe. America still be here. But the problem is, I think that we are we're so short-winded with our intellect and our research. And it doesn't really take that long. I mean, instead of watching CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, anything with a C except C-SPAN, because that's just boring, you'll go to sleep. But when we look at these things, we're not just being politically mature, like Malcolm X said. The Negro is politically immature.
Yeah.
And that's one of our problems.
Political immaturity is a problem. And so what do we mean by that? I think so you talked about actions. Part of our calls to action is to save America from white people's bullcrap. So we're supposed to be the cleanup agents, right? When white people go out and say stupid stuff, don't worry about it. Black women gonna come through, and then after the election, they all say, "Thank you, Black women." And they say Black women because of the idea that Black women, there are a larger percentage of Black women who vote than Black men, and we can talk about the reasons for that in terms of felon disenfranchisement and how people are disenfranchised and all those types of things.
I mean, we put you guys all in cabinet for symbolism, but we won't go there.
So we're supposed to be cleanup crew.
Right.
And we're thanked for being cleanup crew. And I'm over that. I'm not doing that anymore. So I think for me, I think things can always be worse. I'm not one of those Black folks who be like, we survived slavery and, it could always be worse. I think it can be worse, right? Or it can't get any worse.
Definitely.
They say it can't get any worse. I think it can get worse.
It can get worse.
I think the question for us becomes, are we going to vote for the candidate who makes it not great for us or not great for everybody? I think we're at that point. I'm at the point in politics where if Black Americans aren't winning through our engagement in politics, our moral authority, our coaching up the morality of all the people, our human rights legacy, and what it has meant to the civilization of the United States, everybody needs to be suffering. So I'm at that point where I'm tired of talking to people about proper treatment of Black Americans. I've advocated and continue to advocate with lots of folks who have the power to say yes and implement the things I've been asking for. And I'm at this point where if we're going to be uncomfortable in the next election because they're going to benign neglect us, everybody needs to be uncomfortable. Everybody needs to suffer. And I am not willing to save America if America is not willing to save me.
I mean, you pose a really good point, but I do have a question because there's so much to unpack there, right? There's so many different divisions when it comes to Black people, but I guess I'll sum it up like this. How do you emphasize the intersectionality of privilege and oppression, considering factors such as gender, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation?
So here's how I would say that. My advocacy is for Black Americans. However you show up, you religious, irreligious, you are heterosexual, bisexual, straight, you are economically resourced, underprivileged, you are highly educated, not educated at all, and don't have a high school. You're a parent, not a parent. My thing is Black American, point blank, period. Now, after we get that power, can we go and get the other things? That's my approach. So I understand intersectionalities. And what I mean by that is I, as a woman, have intersections in who I am. I'm not just one thing. I'm a Black woman who has a certain level of education, a certain level of income, a certain type or family structure, right? And all of that kind of stuff. Those are my intersections. I don't advocate in any way for policy and economic appropriations that bring other people into the monies and policies for Black Americans. You will never hear me advocate for LGBTQIA plus because they ain't Black. Are there Black people who are LGBTQIA plus? Yes, I covered them in my advocacy.
Did you say why?
Because, Did I say why I don't?
No. The LGBT. Did you say why?
I don't think so. LGBTQIA plus. LGBTQIA plus. I don't think there's a Y in that.
Okay,
yet.
no. I thought you said why. I was about to say now. What's that letter? I never
I
heard
don't think
of it.
so. I don't think so. There's, yeah. I
was
don't
like,
think
please don't let it be something else.
Well, yeah. So, so yeah, that's my approach. I don't do the intersection stuff because once you start adding all these intersections to our advocacy, you just put everybody into our advocacy. And guess what? In an anti-Black society, everybody else is going to get the stuff that you've advocated for because you are the least desired person for your Blackness. And I know that there are ways. The Black community has responses to the LGBTQIA plus community. I know there are ways that the Black community has responses to people who are irreligious, for example, and many other things. So my advocacy is for Black.
Well, there's groups
Americans.
There's groups within Black society that basically states when they're quote unquote even attempting or teasing at legislation for Black folk, and whether it be Cory Bush's bill that has some maybe some baby teeth, which is talking about reparations and the amount, or even Ice Cube contract with Black America, you had people to come out and say, what about Black women? Even though he had Black people in it, then people from the LGBTQIA, the rest of that, you had all these groups come out and say, what about us in the contract with Black America? Are we being included, even though they're saying Black people? Do they not believe that the system of white supremacy exists, or is this a figment of their imagination?
So I would ask those folks to clarify, what is it that Black women need that Black men don't? What is it that Black men need that Black women don't? What is it that Black children and youth need that Black adults don't? What is it that Black LGBTQIA plus people need that their other Blackness doesn't need? The other
Black
elements.
men are part of the patriarchy. That's what they come back with.
Yeah, I don't know how to engage in conversations like that because I mean, I get it as a woman. I get it because I've seen some really crazy stuff in terms of how people will respond to me, even and other women who are doing great work, and the vitriol and venom that I've seen men show up with, which I find disgusting and dishonorable. Right. But so I get that there is a difference in how women are treated. I think for me, though, I'm advocating for policy. I'm advocating for money. I'm advocating for protections. Right. I'm advocating for that kind of stuff for Black people. Right. And so there are maternal health, for example, Black women and their children are dying at ridiculous rates in this first world nation. Now, it affects men in that, men are part of the reason that a baby can happen.
Right, they're losing their kids.
Right. And at the same time, there's that element. There are elements of Black men's health that Black women aren't a part of. Prostate cancer, for example, and things of that sort. So there is
Black males,
Black men with high blood pressure and the like, Black women with heart attacks and even breast cancers that are diagnosed often at stage 4, ridiculousness like that. So there is nuance there that needs to be addressed. And what you see in the data is that it is Black women who are more likely to face that. Not all women get BIPOC, POC. People just add these things for some odd reason when the data doesn't show that those people need to be added in the first place. Now, what is it that Black LGBTQIA plus people need that other LGBTQIA plus people don't need that would make it specific to advocacy for Black folk? I don't know because I'm not LGBTQIA plus. But if there is that valid element, then add it to the Black agenda. But you don't advocate for it based on LGBTQIA plus. You advocate for it because you are Black, and for some reason you can't get testing. The cost of HIV treatment or whatever is super expensive. You are Black and you're more likely to be poor. You're Black, you're more likely to live in the Confederacy, and the states that you live in are less likely to have expanded Medicaid. Therefore, you are going without the drugs to suppress the presence of the virus in your body. I bring all that to the fore because I just watched, what's our sister's name, who just did the brief documentary about Black women and HIV. It wasn't even Black women, it's all women, but 2 Black women were leading it in Georgia. So that's Sarah, I can't think of her name. Anyway, that kind of thing makes sense to me, but that's advocating in the interest of Blackness and that element of Blackness. Are there elements of Black religiosity versus non-religiosity that need to be addressed or can be explicitly?
What does that mean?
So you're religious or you're not religious. So you go to church, you believe
you're
in
going
something.
for your doctorate. I just have my master's, so don't do that.
Stop it. I sound like a dictionary. It's not because of anything besides the fact that we were dirt poor and we didn't have a car, and there was either skipping rocks, riding my bike, or reading, and that's what.
For some reason, I think I'll be the one skipping the rocks.
I did all 3.
Okay.
Yeah, but no. So I don't know, maybe, I think that's a conversation that we can have in the Black community as we're looking at a Black agenda, and I saw that interaction with Ice Cube. And I think at some point we keep arguing when the reality is there are elements to this that Black women need to be included in. Let's bring together a group of Black women to add to the points in your plan, instead of just arguing people down and shutting people down and breaking relationships. I don't know. I think I'm pretty practical in that if I'm going to disagree, the point of disagreement is so we can fix the issue, close the gaps, and move forward. But what I saw is just a lot of
vitriol.
Yeah, and it wasn't productive to me, and it just shut the thing down. And I don't want to do that. I thought Cube had a decent plan. He had the social capital, and if it needed to be tweaked, let's tweak it and keep it pushing.
I mean, even though it didn't go anywhere, he at least tried. He at least tried more so than other people that may have more resources and probably some better, I don't know, lawyers or whatever he curated to put together. But I ask you this, how would you explain, because we kind of stemmed off from the white privilege versus, the white supremacist culture, white supremacy system. How would you even explain what a white supremacist culture is? What is white supremacy culture in your own opinion?
Yeah, so I won't even use my opinion because I think in so many ways I defer to Kenneth Jones and Tima Okun, and they're Okun, I think is how you actually say her name, 2 scholars, advocates for undoing white supremacy, who formulated something called Aspects of White Supremacy Culture. It's about 12 to 13 characteristics that they proposed make up the typical behaviors for prioritizing white culture over others' culture. Yeah, and so you can find this online. It's called Dismantling Racism, a Workbook for Social Change Groups by Kenneth Jones and Tima Okun from Changework 2001. And so these 12 to 13 characteristics have made their way around the world since George Floyd was murdered. And people have twisted them in ways that I find unhelpful and counterproductive. And people have misunderstood them in some ways. So people will look at this and say, if you are perfectionistic, that means you're a white supremacist. That's not what they were saying. What they are saying is in the context of working in cross-cultural, cross-racial environments and relationships, white people have a tendency to focus on perfection as a part of their culture. And when you allow perfection over experimentation, taking risks, innovation, you are leaning toward especially when those prompts for innovation, thinking outside the box, come from non-white people, you might
Right.
need to look at if you're leaning toward perfectionism, is leaning toward whiteness, white privilege, and white supremacy. Does that make sense?
It does.
Versus perfectionism just being white supremacy. When you are focused on a sense of urgency, or let's do quality over quantity. If you're focused on quantity over quality, you might be more focused on more is good. The more we throw at it, the better, versus someone saying, hey, let's slow down and look at the impacts of what we're doing. Let's look at
Right.
the outcomes from what we're doing, and saying that at the front. And especially if that prompt to slow down, take a look at the impacts is coming from a non-white person. If you're focused on let's just keep going and do more and all of that, you might be leaning more toward white supremacy, white privilege, and all of that. That's the kind of, it's more nuanced than just saying the things on this paper mean you're a white supremacist. It's all contextualized and rooted in the context. It's rooted in who you're interacting with, who is providing the pushback, feedback, right? That's counter to whatever perfectionism, defensiveness, and the like. So I think the best way to use these aspects of white supremacy culture is for self-reflection, for reflection on how you show up as an individual person, reflection on how you show up as a leader within an organization, reflection on how your team operates when there's, either it's homogenous, meaning there are a number of white people, or there are white folks and others. Whose advice, input, feedback gets priority. Though it's a reflective tool rather than just this thing that says, if you show up with this, that means you're a white supremacist. I hope that makes sense.
In white supremacy culture, do you believe there's subsets or subcultures that some people may believe that the only white supremacy that exists are the ones who go out and commit, physical hate crimes? Are there ones who maybe in a Fortune 500 company that is part of a white supremacist culture, but they are the high earners? That they also have a different class, so they exploit, they execute their white supremacist acts and actions, maybe managerially or legislatively, or by some means that is non-violent and I won't say non-violent, but I'll say non-physical.
I understand where you're coming from with that. Yeah, I think you've made a good case for that. And I think that's true. I think we're all at different points of racial identity development. White people on their trajectory, Black people on their trajectory. And I think generally speaking, humans are bad at self-reflection, right? They're bad at looking at how am I showing up and what does it mean? And then you add to that this idea that, these racist, biased ideas about Black people, their competence, if you should listen to them and all that kind of stuff, then you can get these things. I think people wield power at the level that they have it. And if my level of power is the waitress level, and I could treat you like crap while I'm serving you or do other things, right? Then if I have bias, I'll show up in that way. If my level of power is the congressional majority level where I get to determine what the policy is going to be, then I'm going to push my biases out in that way. And if I don't have anyone, like I talked about before, Black people at that table, I don't have a Black American advisory group or friend or colleague that I am willing to listen to, then you get what you get from my own.
Now, I guess another question would be, going off what you just said, how do these traits intersect with and reinforce white privilege in decision-making processes?
Yeah, so imagine defensiveness. So one of the aspects of white supremacy culture is defensiveness. So we talked about the importance of feedback, right? Somebody gives you feedback on how you're showing up, and you either accept that feedback, reflect on that feedback, and adjust, or you say, ain't nothing wrong with me, it's all you. And so I think taken to the extreme, or even in the context of being weaponized through bias, you can see these things greatly reinforcing white supremacy, right? Defensiveness, perfectionism. the idea that the way my hair grows out of my head doesn't lay down and it's not super smooth. It grows up toward the sun and it's curly and yada, yada, yada. And so am I unprofessional because I show up with my hair in this way? So leaning into perfectionism that way. Yeah.
I guess the way that I look at it, it's like if we have all of these different layers and barriers of issues, we either be living in a white supremacist world, and on top of that, having white privilege. What challenges do you foresee in the ongoing discourse about white privilege, and what solutions do you propose to address them that may foster maybe greater understanding and to again really buckle the white privilege, element that rests inside the system of white supremacy?
So I'm gonna say something that might sound cynical and defeatist, right? But I'm just
Right.
being real. White supremacy and the idea that white people are superior, better, more worthy has been drilled into everybody for generations. And I say that to say that the thing we're seeking to undo is deeply ingrained. And there are many families, churches, organizations, corners of our world, corners of our culture, corners of our neighborhoods and the like, where people never have these conversations about what it means to live in this nation, given its history of anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And so all that to say, white privilege, the idea that white people are conferred unearned access and opportunities based on skin color. White fragility, the idea that white people will be upset by hearing about the impacts of their behavior, their words on Black people. And white supremacy formally are going to be with us for some time. I think the important thing is incentivizing being anti-racist and non-biased toward Black people, fixing it when you mess up as a white person, and consequences, severe, deterring, don't do that again, you don't want to feel this pain, kind of consequences for significant acts of harm against Black people. Yeah.
I guess I have a two-sided question. I guess they coincide with one another, I believe, or it might contradict. I just don't know where I'm going at right now, but I have the question. How long, now first, do you believe that the system of white supremacy will ever be dismantled? And or if it is dismantled, when do you project when that can occur? What era, what generation, what timeline?
I love that question. So I'd like to approach this from the idea of systems within systems. So let's talk about the context of America. The context of the United States of America system can certainly see a weakening, neutering, undoing might not be the right word, neutering of the power of white supremacy to exist in general and certainly to exist without consequences. So it can become a smaller, less significant, less impactful system of thinking. Can white supremacy within the context of the United States of America, or within the context of the Western Hemisphere, or within the context of the entire globe, be absolutely, completely eradicated? I don't know. If it can happen anywhere, it can happen in the United States of America because of our history. Black American human rights, civil rights struggle, and the legacy stuff that we have on the books to reconstruct the nation out of white supremacy and repair the Negro, right? Is how I frame that. I think it can also happen in a predominantly Black ecosystem, or mixed in an existing nation, is what I mean. So could it happen in an African country that is committed to undoing, not the right word, dismantling the ability of white supremacy to exist within its operations as a culture? Yes, because they're predominantly Black. Do they have the will and ability and resources to do that? And the systems and structure and motivation? I don't know. We can ask the same thing of,
well, you can answer that question. You can say no because they haven't done it. I mean,
well, so there are things.
There may be some that is working on it, but tell me one.
I hear what you're saying, but I think sometimes people don't know what they don't know and people aren't motivated to do what they could do until they dedicate themselves to doing it. So I'm giving a little bit of grace, but I agree it hasn't been done, and it needs to be.
Let me, and this is not one of the I got you moments. How big is the African continent compared to other continents?
So it's humongous.
Right.
If I understand the Mercator projection, which is what we use, they made
right.
Europe.
I know you want to go by the other one like I do.
Peter's projection, yeah. And I only name them because of the benefit of the audience. I think you can fit almost 3 to 4 of the entire United States in the continent of Africa. I think you can fit many of the other continents inside the continent of Africa, like together inside the continent of Africa, plus Madagascar. It's massive. The 54 countries clearly have their own levels of development, resourceness, awareness of these social elements.
But here's my point. Out of those 54 countries in Africa, how many of them is operating on a stock market? Africa is the one continent with the most resources. It has over 1 billion people, and they don't have their own stock market. But when you look at these other countries, these Western European countries, Africa probably has 100 times more resources, more natural minerals, gold, silver, cobalt, iridium, you name it. They have all of those things. And we look at the natural resources when it comes to food, Africa compared to these other countries, how they're shipping food to Africa. When I went over there, they had cassava roots growing out of, everywhere. They have abundance of resources. So when I look at it, I'm just like, the Western European world, I understand, work on a fiat system. But when I look at how vast Africa is, and not none of them are operating by themselves, they're in some forms being economically colonized to a certain degree by the way of Europe and now China. I just don't see, in my lifetime at least, how they will eradicate the system of white supremacy in their countries. Because don't forget, in Nigeria, they just built this huge statue of Jesus. And let's just say he was of the fairer complexion.
Yeah. So, and I think that, I think we underestimate what it takes to build a system. And at the same time, I think we overestimate the difficulty of doing so. It ain't my job as a Black American to go to build Africa. And that's been the predominant Pan-African, how Africa's gonna develop kind of thing. You Black Americans come over here, struggle with us to build us up. And there are all kinds of complexities and resistance from Africans for that to happen. The reality is that the people who've come into our ecosystem in the United States from Africa and other places need to take what they've learned back to their home countries, countries, and build up those places using their knowledge they acquired here and their cultural capital from being a native of that environment. And not ask me, some person who's been in America from forever, to go over and try to learn a whole system and somehow convince people to cooperate with me and all these other elements. I think the whole concept, this is a whole nother conversation we can have, the way that Pan-Africanism has been structured in that logic model is backwards and needs to be fixed. And I think that will help them build. The other element is Africa is being colonized.
Oh, definitely.
It's still colonized.
Definitely.
And I think that we have to remember how many pro-African leaders have been assassinated by the West.
You didn't want to put a label on it, but I get you. Now, when you were talking about Pan-Africanism, I wonder what Dr. Umar Johnson would say.
That is intriguing. So I would be curious to know Umar's actual logic model, because I don't know that I've heard him talk, obviously, but I don't know that I understand or have seen an actual logic model for what he thinks is going to happen, and then what the steps and what the outcome would be. And what is his logic model that you've ascertained?
Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. So yeah, I'd love to see that if Umar if he hears this, I'd love to hear his logic model, because it ain't gonna happen by 40 million Black Americans going to a continent of 1 billion people and somehow magically building them up. Like, it's just...
I mean, I think the best solution, and not to be divisive with our African brothers and sisters, but it's for them to be one nation. The model that you have in front of you is America, and we're still touted as the most powerful country in the world, even though there's countries more peaceful, more prosperous in some regards, even more beautiful, but people still come to America in droves. They not only come through the southern border, but they fly to the southern border. People from China,
walk through the jungle.
India, right? China, India, come over, Haiti, you name it, they're coming over. So I get to your point. Yeah, we won't be able to, solve this. I think that they have issues that they could essentially eradicate like this, right? But because of the political atmosphere, I guess, that no one just won't say, listen, hey, you know what? Thank you for our independence, but everybody get out if you're not African, if you're not, a melanated Black African. And not to be divisive, I'm just thinking about a true plan, because then those leaders, right? You might have to get the leaders out, then do that. But nonetheless, I would take the model that Julius Malema was talking about. He said, we need to be like the United States. We need to have United States of Africa. But he said we're going to have to get rid of a lot of these white people. That's what he said. And he didn't mean, hurt them or anything like that, but send them back to their country. We have to get these so-called people who have been colonized, mentally by that system that was in place in Africa, and totally build it from the ground up, and have one president and have governors, right? Have governors like we do in the United States, where you're quote unquote still the president, but you're part of a bigger governmental entity for checks and balances. And when you need help financially, and again, they have a great majority of the world's natural resources, but they're being colonized. And I would say they're being colonized more so economically than anything else. So
yeah, so Malema is an interesting person, to say the least.
Absolutely.
I think that there have been, in the last 8 to 10 years, as I've been watching what's happening with the push for the United States of Africa, there have been some economic forward momentum with ECOWAS and all of these different regions of the continent, and the African diaspora region, as they're calling it as well. I think the most expeditious, the fastest way for Africa to develop is for Native Africans who are in the West wherever they are, Australia, France, Europe,
Right.
Germany, United States, whatever, for
A
them to go,
European colonized country.
for them to go home and build the thing that they know how to do over there.
Mm.
That is the quickest way to do it. Again, you speak the language, your mama know the person across the street. You know what I mean? That's the best way to do it. So you want a Nollywood or a Africa
Right.
Wood or whatever, gone over there and set that all up with the money that you have and the connections that you have, and do that over
Why
there.
did you
in
say it
Africa.
like that? Gone over there. And
Well, because people come over here to our under-resourced selves and they just stay and they try to become Black American or African American. And this needs to be a pit stop on your road to developing your own space. To that, in my thought and idea, and I'm not trying to be divisive, but I'm just saying, don't come over here and try to compete with us for the stuff we didn't fought for. There are a billion of you. It's grossly unfair. And to call that a legitimate framework for Pan-Africanism, I think is crazy.
I was talking to someone earlier as we're about to close down here about the 7 stages of an empire.
Mm.
And if we kind of walk through this very briefly here, I don't have enough information to kind of give so much context to this, but the Age of the Pioneers, when
I've
the
heard of
Pilgrims
it.
came over, or the murders or the killers of the Native American people, that eradicated them from their land and gave them diseases, stuff like that. Then you have the Age of Conquest. They came in as pilgrims, but they conquered as killers and murderers. Then you have the Age of Commerce, where people started to trade and barter and do business. The Age of Influence, where classism started to come in. And then you have the Age of Intellect, where people started to focus on getting, more majority of the population started to get more intelligent and more informed, right? And don't forget, these are different stages that I'm comparing this to America. Because when we look at Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, as well as Rome and certain kingdoms of Africa, and how they first started off and they peaked and then they dropped, right? And these are kind of the ages that empires essentially go through. I believe we're somewhere in the middle between the age of decadence and the age of decline and collapse. That's where I believe we are, because there's all these red flags and indicators that let us know that the foundational which the Constitution is no longer in effect. Is people are bypassing the Constitution when we look at illegal immigration. Now, when illegal immigrants, when they come over, we're labeling as asylum seekers. But when the Department of State, or the State Department rather, called to these countries to verify these people to say, are they seeking political persecution? No, they just literally came to America because they no longer want to be in their country. It's violence here in America. What if, and I'm just going to use the inflammatory term, Chicago. Chicagoans went down to Mexico because of violence in Chicago. Well, you're going to get, when you come here, we have the so-called, not official, catch and release program, but that's essentially what it's been. And then we have, Governor Abbott here in Texas, Ron DeSantis, and some of these other border governors are shipping and delivering migrants to these majority Black cities. They're soaking up already the meager resources that they have. Now, granted, I'm gonna be an angel's advocate of Black folk. God damn it, we did it to ourselves.
Tell me more about that.
We did it to ourselves. We continue to vote Democrat blindly. We went in there, vote for who? Vote for Joe. Vote for who? Vote for Joe. And that's what we did. And what did Joe promise us? What he told us was, the African American community had our back, and I'm gonna have theirs. That's what he did. And he banged on the desk. That's what he did. He banged on the desk.
So he lied.
Basically. But what he did was, and I'll end with this, what he did was, he gave Black people a lot of symbolism. I'm a, Pastor George Floyd policing Justice and Policing Act. That's still somewhere in the House between the Senate. Who knows? Never made Black Americans a protected class. Never spoke of reparations. How dare he? Because Kamala Mammy Harris, she said something about it, but she said, I ain't doing nothing just for Black folk. And anything else that he essentially hinted to Black Americans of what he was going to do, he never brought it up again. He never even mentioned it again. But when we look at all these other groups, even the illegal immigrants, okay, or some people say migrants, and I know you two may flag me for saying illegal. Oh, well, they're illegal.
That's crazy.
It is what it is to me. They're getting more support from the government than those Black citizens in those cities and towns.
Yep. Yeah. So what stage are we in the empire of the United States? Man.
I think we're in a sweet spot between the age of decadence and the age of decline and collapse. I think we're right in the middle. And
so
none of these empires have ever rebound.
Oh yeah, I get you. So here's what I'd like to offer. I'm going to put this out and manifest it, right? I think that I hear you. I can understand that. Decadence is, yes, I think that's right on for so many reasons. Like the things that people are doing right now, I just don't even understand why they think it's okay and why they want to normalize some of the things. Reading kids, like drag queens reading the kids, why is that necessary for them to understand creativity and all of that kind of stuff?
What about shoplifting? I remember where you used to have your old aunt or somebody going inside of the department store and put stuff in their girdle because you didn't have no new clothes for school, right?
Like to actually sneak steal. Yeah, that ain't
right.
No
But again, they made Black folk the face of this retail theft, which isn't true. Some people have done investigations where there's been Hispanics as well. I digress. But they're literally, I could never fathom just running in a retail store, a bunch of us, like, it's like a flash mob. They took flash mob and call it theft mob, right? But I never had enough courage to do that. I remember, true story, in Washington, D.C., Southeast D.C., I was about, I was around maybe 11 or 12, 13. Me and my friend, we went to a place called the Tiger Market. And that's when the cap guns was back in. You had a little cap gun. I was like, oh, I don't have any more caps for my gun. So I was like, I'm gonna go to the Tiger Market and steal some. I got caught because they had a camera. And I got my butt whooped. But the point is, I was even scared of doing that versus 20, 30 of us. Hey, we're going to hit up the Fendi store and we're just going to bum rush it and we're going to steal clothes. We don't care if people have guns and try to kill us for these clothes. So when you speak about that, drag queens teaching.
Yeah. And the books that they're having children read now is just wild to me. So decadence, absolutely. And so that decadence to me started within the last 3 generations, maybe 2, the generation being 25 years or thereabouts, maybe 2 to 3 generations.
I kind of say the baby boomers and Generation X. That's what it kind of really.
And I think the 60s, 70s, deal. And are we close enough to stage 5, the age of intellect, I think is what it was called, where now we're also learning more about history, where we have this technological age where all of us are holding all of history in our hands. I can find out about any place in the world holding this little thing, right? So there's a way that these things dovetail. And are we close enough to the age of intellect where we could see and predict, see the past, see what's happening, predict the outcomes, look at places that have gone this way and switch course and change course? I think that requires a level of political commitment, patriotism, rational thought, practicality over feelings that I have never heard a leader call us into.
You know why? I don't believe we'll ever get there? Because we do not live in a meritocracy. We don't.
Mhm.
There,
Never have.
there's leeches at every level. So as long as you can suck off for someone to get ahead, you will. Right? Think about we're in this we're in innovation, automation, AI, robotics. I don't have to work hard to do my job. I can have Chat GPT, some AI software. Now they're building, all these very intricate and complex robots.
Mm.
I mean, now companies are laying off thousands of people because we have algorithms and automations to do the
Mhm.
jobs for us. So we have to do this sort of a paradigm shift. But where are these new jobs if you're not in the tech industry? So automatically, if you're having more automation, more AI, complete mundane tasks, or to this point, complex tasks, you're
Mhm.
not going to have people. You might have one software engineer in case the system goes down. Needs some more, I don't know, Freon so the systems don't get hacked. And you got all these, companies in quantum computing. Eventually, when I look at a lot of these futuristic movies where you see majority of everybody is poor, and there's only like 10% of the
Mhm.
population living well, that is the age of decline and collapse. And we're
Mhm.
getting there faster what some people may think. Because guess what? If people, you've seen it, you've been out and about, people are still buying houses, people are still buying cars. Now at a much lower rate, but they are paying a much higher interest rate. Where if all these people are still high spending money, inflation is slowly decreasing, but not at the rate that they predicted, depending on how many people is in the market. So when I look at this, the economic structure, another another indicator of decadence and decline or collapse, I'm looking at this right here, the way I picture it is war. Now we're not moving far forward of enemy lines like the Nazis did and how they kind of lost the war, as well as how the Roman Empire lost the war. They extended their military resources so far out they can replenish them, etc. Look what we're doing. We're just sending tons of money and resources to Ukraine and Israel to fight their wars. And there's been all sorts of talks about what's unjust,
Mhm.
what's inhumane when it comes over to Israel, and should we be sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, even though Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union with Russia.
Mhm.
There's so many complexities to these theories that are out there. But when I look at it, I'm telling you, it's so hard for me to pick decadence or decline and collapse because I think we're right in the middle.
Mm.
And here's a good question. How long do I believe it's going to take us to get to the age of decline and collapse? I won't be alive. It's going to take some time because we're definitely moving there. Now, let me ask you this.
Hmm.
Are we moving closer to decline and the collapse or the age of commerce?
Now that's interesting, and maybe I'm thinking of this in a linear way. Um, I think when we talk about Somali, I think when we talk about collapse, let's think of it in stages and places. So it may not be a free fall, right, where
Right.
everything just falls down on top of it. It could be that this goes, or the foundation weakens over here
Right.
on the northwest corner, right? That's how I anticipate it happening. You've heard people say this in terms of like God has been taken out of things. I'm not religious, by the way. I'm very familiar with the Western tradition, actually consider going to seminary, but I'm not religious and I never will be. But I understand spirituality and I understand the traditions and I can talk to people about all the
Does
things.
spirituality exist or did we create it?
I feel that I am connected to everyone around me and I have a responsibility to all the things and people around me. And I don't understand if there is a higher power, if there is somebody who decided to put all us together in this artful way. I don't know. I can't prove it. I don't feel pressed. To prove it or disprove it. I just show up trying to be the best person that I can be.
Quick
That's
question.
my vibe.
Quick question.
I know
Gun
it's
to
a
your
tangent.
head, yes or no? Gun to your head, yes or no?
Mm.
Does spirituality actually exist, or is it a social construct?
Religion or spirituality?
spirituality?
So I think most things are social constructs because they're not natural. Like it's not a tree, right?
You didn't fall for the trick. Okay, good.
Like, sorry, I just got shot. Right, because I'm so non-compliant with these yes or no things. No, I'm just kidding. So I think it'll happen in parts. I don't think that religion per se or the lack of it is the core issue. I think it's a lack of integrity that is part of the issue, a significant part of the issue. And I think for some people, religion is the mechanism, the social construct that they use to help them live with integrity. I can live with integrity without religion, just because
Absolutely.
I've chosen.
I do it every day.
Yeah, I've chosen to do that. And I'm not condemning anyone, but I think
No, not at all.
I think there are ways that things are collapsing for various reasons. And with that said, I think we have choices to make about how we want to show up. Do we keep going down this path, the whole path? Which parts of this is working, this path we're going down? Which parts is like, I'm going to take this and the rest of this shit, I'm leaving because it ain't working, right? But I think it does take leaders to frame that up. I think it takes thought leaders to frame it up. I think it takes implementation leaders to do the things that make that framing a real thing. And I just haven't seen that level of leadership.
Nope.
In a really, really, really long time. And I don't know if people would accept it in mass anyway. I don't know if people want that. I think people want sexy and strife-filled and pithy. And I think people thrive on BS, and that's unfortunate because that's what you're going to end up getting more of. I'm sorry.
I don't think a lot of people growing up, especially in our generation, looked at the cartoon Care Bears.
Bring back Care Bears. That's the solution right there. You're probably right.
That's the solution. Bring back Care Bears. Last question for you, Dr. Long. Let's do one phrase. So 3-tiered question. One phrase, or one word. One phrase or one word.
Okay.
How can the world dismantle the system of white supremacy, the white supremacist culture, as well as white privilege? How would you explain that in one phrase or one word?
Okay, so is a phrase the same as a single word? I just want to make sure I'm complying with the rules. So here's what I'd say. Self-determination. And if you allow me some leniency, sir, I will say absolute self-determination. Can I elaborate?
You know what? I was going to leave off with that. No, I'm not letting you get off, Dr. Long. Listen. No. You have to provide some context, okay? I give you 1 minute. Go ahead.
Absolute self-determination. We talked earlier about people who are native to Africa and other places going back and building up their predominantly Black environments. Don't seek permission. Go do it. I think about the brother who built Aswazi, I think is how you pronounce it, University in Ghana. He was a tech guy from Africa out in Cali, built up his money, took all that money back, built up a university. Nice, really nice university. Go be the thing that you want to see. With Black Americans, that's implementing Claude Anderson's ethno-aggregation as laid out in Powernomics. Point blank, period. Build it is how you dismantle it. You make it unnecessary to your thriving and surviving. That's how you do it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Long. Before we get out of here, I will point people to your social media. This is Dr. Long's Twitter page where you can contact her, as well as her YouTube page. Go and support this sister, very intelligent. Congratulations. This is, in advance.
Cool.
Getting your doctorate. I will never get there with you. I just be a master.
You're good.
As well as, go and support her. Plus size the number. How does this get up here? What is this? What in the world is this?
So I came to the domestic reparations work from the international community. So I was doing UN Women. I supported CARICOM when that originally came out. I was talking about reparations back in the late 2000s when nobody was really talking
Was
about
the
it and looking
TVs
at me
in black
crazy.
and white then?
They weren't, but I think they
Okay.
just switched over.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's the UNESCO Inclusive Policy Lab. My work is centered around the impact of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism on Black Americans. So what does it mean to have open borders? What does it mean to shoehorn other people into the concept of civil rights and the like? Because, yeah, we can't just call inclusion inviting everybody into our legacy, because we end up displaced and erased as a result.
Also, you can contact Dr. Long on Muck Rack. What is this about? Let us tell us about this.
Yeah, so Muckrack is basically a, how do you say, it is a profile of most of my public work that I've written for media outlets. So you can go see many of my things, not all of them, but many of the things that I've written on that.
All right. And lastly, your LinkedIn with no picture.
Yes. So my LinkedIn doesn't have a picture, probably because you're not signed in. So in order to see my LinkedIn profile in full, you have to be signed in. You can send me a connection request on LinkedIn. I share many. Are you signed in? I don't know.
Yeah, there we go.
Strange. Okay, I don't know what
This
that's
is our
about.
pretty face over here to the left.
Okay, I do have a picture up there. Maybe we're not connected on LinkedIn, so send me a
Okay.
connection request and we can connect. I do post pro-Black stuff. I keep my stuff black in all spaces where I occupy. I'm not truly Twitter like Denise on LinkedIn, because it's a professional environment and I'm promoting my business. But I keep it black, so we can connect on LinkedIn. So thank you for sharing all those ways to connect with me. I appreciate it.
Problem. And also, all of those links, family, are in the description of this video. So instead of you going to do what I did, I already list them for easy access, so to speak. Do you have any ending remarks, Ms. Long?
I always appreciate our conversation. So thank you for once again having me on. And I hope this video and this conversation about white supremacy culture helps people better understand it. And I would encourage people to actually go look for the white supremacy culture printout. It's like 6 pages and you can read the things yourself. Easy read. And yeah, send me a connection request on any of those platforms. Good to see you again, as always.
Likewise. Thank you so much. You have a great evening.
You too.